Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Nikki Naab-Levy. So Nikki has come highly recommended to me. She is a Pilates teacher, fitness educator, works with massage. She's been featured in all kinds of publications, done somatic approaches. Already get the sense this is going to be a fun one. So Nikki, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And how did you get interested in working with the body?
It's funny because now a lot of what I do is more of somatic, post-rehab, preaching self-care. But really it started with the fact that I'm kind of someone who deals with frustration through movement. And I figured out that if I pounded the crap out of my joints, that I would feel better emotionally. And then that led to a lot of injuries.
Yeah.
And when I was too injured to beat the crap out of my body anymore, I realized I might actually have to learn something and take a different approach to movement and fitness. And that's what set me on this journey.
So you're one of those like me who learns the hard way.
Always. And it doesn't matter. You could have told me 15 years ago not to do things the way I did them, and I still would have done it and had to go through this journey. So
that's the kind of bloody mindedness I appreciate. So when you say you're pounding the shit out of yourself, what were you doing? What was your sort of first kind of fitness and kind of stuff that you were doing? And then what did that evolve into?
High impact, high intensity aerobics. So like a lot of jump, pound, like jogging and flailing in space is the way I would say it. I mean, with love, I still have a soft spot for all that stuff, but just a whole lot of like high impact cardio, which anyone who knows anything about how joints like to take an impact if you don't have stability doesn't go very well.
Okay. So it was like you were pounding yourself, jumping up and down, but somehow that gave you kind of an emotional release by the sounds of things.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, and I think anyone who's like a quote unquote fitness person or a gym person understands this. It's sort of like, your nervous system, when you're really high strung, the thing your nervous system actually probably needs is like some parasympathetic response, like something that actually will downregulate. So you can better regulate your system. But like, that's not generally what kind of overachievers or overachievers in recovery are attracted to. Like, we're definitely more attracted to doing more of the intense things to handle our intense lives.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When you go to the average gym, it is pretty intense as an environment, just sensorially. It's loud, it's bright, and most classes are 1,000 miles an hour, and there's a relief from the sort of subtle sensation of emotion within that. But as you say, it can feel like a relief, but actually it's not what's really needed.
Right. It's kind of it's not that those things are bad, because I mean, I still have, like I said, I still appreciate those things, but it's more of sometimes self-care isn't the thing that you like, it's the thing that you need. And I mean, I think we all know this. Sometimes the things that we need are not the things that we actually want to be doing.
Sure. I think people can be just drawn to something that deepens their own neurosis and pathology without necessarily kind of examining that and going, okay, that slightly uncomfortable thing is actually what's going to be deeply nourishing for me, but it's a bit uncomfortable because I have to step out of my, familiar embodiment. Someone's super hyper aroused and going for a quick urban life. Last thing they want to do is come into a sort of slow somatic yoga class. I've heard people describe yin yoga, for example, as one of the worst experiences they've ever had. It's just too much for them.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people. Like I've got a lot of friends who like do meditation and teach yin yoga, and they teach all of these things. And I like one of them is like going to like a gong training this weekend, and I was like, your life is my worst nightmare.
I remember once, because I'm pretty fast and usually I do pretty fast stuff, but I've learned that doing slower stuff, gentler stuff is really nourishing and helpful for me. And it's still not my disposition, but I enjoy it now. I've gone from forcing myself to kind of being okay with it to genuinely enjoying it. But I remember one time I was teaching a corporate group in the Netherlands, and this Dutch executive got right up in my face after a meditation, which I did a 10-minute meditation, just silent 10 minutes. And he got right up in my face. He said, "That's the hardest thing I've ever done." He pointed his finger right up at me and went, "Never make us do anything like that again." It was like really like he was like threatening me because it was like so unpleasant. And I'm like, well, okay, we'll start with 3 minutes next time. 10 minutes was too much. So what do you do now? Like, how are you spending your days in Tacoma, Washington?
Well, sometimes they're spent in Seattle because I still have clients kind of down that way. But I definitely, most of the work I do in terms of how I work with people is more of, ironically, the restorative, somatic, slowing down side. So there is a lot more stuff with like mobility and stability work, things for self-care, talking to clients about like how they can do things outside of whatever it is that's usually inducing some sort of pain or anxiety or fear of injury, to kind of take care of themselves and feel safe in their bodies. And so they can kind of do the stuff they want to do, but from a place of balance, as opposed to from a place of every time I go do this thing, I know I'm going to end up back at the physical therapist's office. So I mean, what that looks like is very different for each client. I think anyone who's done a lot of trainings understands that you don't, at least for me, it's hard to stay in like one lane. But I definitely spend a lot of time like just showing people like actually how to slow down and notice what they're feeling, and then preferably come at it from a place where I don't sound like I have a tinfoil hat on my head. So most of my people are a little like me. They're more hyperlinear. So they actually want a somatic approach. They actually want to do breathing. They want to be embodied, but they don't necessarily want to talk about it with some of those somatic terms that we're so fond of in our community.
Yeah, sure. So you're not a dolphin fucker by the sound of things. That's the term like colloquial use over here. maybe
I don't think we use that one here in the States.
You don't use that one. We have unicorn shagger, dolphin shagger. These are, my students often buy me toy unicorns and dolphins as a joke because I take a similar position.
Okay, now see, that's funny because mine do too. But I have a lot of unicorns
and dolphins. They like to take.
Yeah, no dolphins. Mine are unicorns and goats. But yes,
goats. You get goats. My power animal. Okay, I'm not sure why anyone listening would be interested in my goat power animals, but anyway. So you mentioned fear there, and you sent me a few things to reflect upon beforehand. And what I liked was, the opening one you sent me here was, people approaching fitness from a point of view of fear. And it's like, you've got to do this, or you're going to die of a heart attack, or you're going to get fat. No one's going to love you. Like generally, there's a lot of fear in that industry, I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny. My rant of the fear mongering isn't even in fitness, I have to say. It's almost more in the post-rehab and somatic world.
Okay.
Because I think what happens is, and I don't appreciate that you're going to get fat and die fear mongering shtick either, to be honest. But by the time people find me, usually they've seen a lot of other practitioners. They've seen physical therapists and chiropractors and massage therapists and like wind chime gurus and like all of the things. Like they have seen a lot of people, and they come to me and usually the rhetoric is something like, ugh, my pelvis is just so crooked. I've got one hip that's higher. It's wrecking my back. I know that I can't like walk without my pelvis being crooked, and it's like this horrible pain. And now I'm afraid to do anything. And so I must use 18 pillows to be able to lift my leg lying on my back unloaded. And I'm like, okay, like your pelvis is not broken. It's okay to be crooked. Like you don't need to be afraid of moving because you have imbalance or asymmetries. We all have it. And so rather than teaching people like, oh, you have this thing wrong with you, you can't do any of these things, you're so unstable, I prefer the approach, and I find people seem to get better when I talk to them this way, more of like, okay, so your pelvis is a little bit, you said crooked. I do see it's like high on one side and low on the other. I wonder like what muscle imbalance or what it is in your daily habits of moving that are creating this, which shows you're strong in one direction, weak in another, and what could we do to strengthen these weak areas to create more balance. And like, yes, your pelvis might be less crooked when all is said and done, but that's not really the point. And you don't need to fear crooked pelvis. Your SI joint's not going to explode if you move your leg and it's like slightly out of neutral alignment, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. People can get kind of very fearful of, yoga teachers, for example, getting very fearful that the knee is not aligned with the ankle perfectly in every pose. And then, you'll see kids just walking on the edges of their feet or just doing something which will be so counterindicated by kind of any art. And then, you might want to do it all day, but like there is a certain robustness there, and it can get kind of it can get a little neurotically fearful.
Yeah, and then I think it's also understanding like when that level of nuanced alignment matters, right? So if you're going to be nuanced, like I love nuance, why are you choosing to be nuanced in that moment? So it's like if you're going to like be powerlifting with a 200-pound bar on your back, like, yeah, I mean, I hope your knee is somewhere around over your second toe. There shouldn't be some crazy thing happening between the knee and the ankle, for example. Like that's where like neutral alignment matters. And do you want to train someone to sort of have a sense of where that is because that's where they'll have the most balance in the joint and the best body awareness? Absolutely. But at the same time, do we need to freak out if their knee is slightly in or out when they do a heel slide lying on their back and there's no load? And this is someone who's like afraid to move the leg because they've had pain. At that point, it's more a pain positive movement experience than to be like, oh no, knee.
Yeah, thank you. Cut out just for a moment there. I might just take the video off just to take the quality of the sound up. It's we need a new box here. Okay, well that makes sense to me, and you're kind of hitting it, Nikki, from different angles as well, right? So like you're doing strength training, you're doing Pilates. I know you're studying Aston patterning. You were saying at the moment, so you're kind of bringing all sorts of different things to the party.
Yes, I am. And so that's part of my approach too, is just this idea of what I've learned from taking so many trainings is there's a lot of people who will tell you, this is the exact way to do something. You must always do it this way. And if you break these rules, horrible things will happen. And then you go to another training with an equally educated, smart person, and then they tell you the exact opposite. And so what you start to learn is actually it just depends. And just hopefully you have a reason for why you're doing things the way that you do them. And you're checking in with your client to make sure that they feel safe and okay about what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, we are in that age now when there's so much available. I mean, if you look at this podcast, for example, or your own podcast, you run one too. There's just so many good teachers out there. There's so much stuff there. It's how do you pick between them? Because it's one thing saying, yeah, different things work for different people, but that it doesn't help much, does it? In terms of like, okay, yeah, but I've got a bad knee or whatever. Where do I go?
Right. I think that's true. And I mean, in my opinion, the best teachers are the people who have an understanding, again, of like biomechanics, science, how the body works, and preferably load. So, they know when, again, like heavier loads, alignment matters more because of impact on joints. But at the same time, they also have, critical thinking. I think, I wish I had something more concrete to say to like how to pick the best teacher, but really, like, I don't care what you do or what modality you come from, but where I tend to see things go wrong for people is when there's a lack of critical thinking. So it's like you've been given this movement cue or this alignment rule or this guideline, and then it doesn't, and then the person shows up, and then like clearly whatever you're saying or doing like is not working, and you keep doing it. Like that's a problem.
I feel like there's two things in there. There's critical thinking and there's sort of checking experientially. And like, so on the one, like some of the things I hear in the average yoga class, for example, just don't make sense. And if it wasn't for the sort of weird authority structure of not being able to ask questions, for example, like most yoga classes, you can't, there isn't space, everyone's silent. I just don't think like people would, in any other context, people would kind of take it, if someone was in their workplace kind of talking the same kind of bullshit. So I feel like there's the critical thinking and then there's the testing it for yourself. There's that actually like, okay, I've been told to do this. Let me give it a try. Okay, does that feel right? Does that, some things I've been told to do in yoga for 22 years. And I was just in class yesterday going, at what point do I say, all right, fuck this? Like, all right, not in the first week, because, it's difficult to do something new and it's going to feel a bit weird and new and uncomfortable because new things do. But at what point in years of training do you just go, okay, this is bollocks. This just doesn't work.
Yep. I mean, and I don't want to rip on any one style of yoga, but I think I still have like mild like trauma, let's just say, from like the one and only Bikram yoga class I ever took. And I mean, I still remember the cues because they were so strong, and I'm hypermobile. So like I can go like way out of joint, and they're saying things like, lock your knee, you have no knee, your knee is like a lamppost. And I was like, I'm not going to lock my knee. If I lock my knee, I'm going to like shove my tibia like way behind me, and it's going to end very, very poorly for me. I'm not going to be able to walk straight tomorrow. So I was like basically modifying. Like I took the class, but I softened my knee. I didn't go into like the giant back bend, even though I could, because I knew it wasn't going to feel good, whatever. And I mean, this woman who was teaching like was like on me like white on rice. There was like 40 people in this room, and she was like, I was hiding in the back, and she was zeroed in on me. She called me out so many times that my friends and I went out for a drink, and my nickname was Nikki the bitch for the rest of the night. They're like, we don't know what you did to her, but like, man, you offended her by existing.
Yeah, I think it almost takes on a moral quality in these different schools. And I feel like just consent can go out the window. And I feel like with some teachers, that's like really adjusting people or, telling you have to do something. And I'm always like, nah. And most of the teachers I work with now, they're actually the vast, I'm kind of from an Irish background. I mean, I like being told what to do. But, the vast majority I see of my teachers, that on the one hand, they will allow me to sort of kind of do my own thing, and they won't shame me or attack me or ridicule me for it, if I feel like there's something that needs to happen there. But there's also this subtle social pressure that's constantly in classes to do it the way that's being told. And I feel like that's underrated because we are social animals, and we pick up on those social cues very readily. And it takes, a special kind of rebellious asshole to be able to resist that. And I'm thinking, God, if I find it hard, and I'm like on the scale of rebellious assholes, I'm right off on one end of the spectrum. Like the average sort of agreeable person must find it really difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because I am also a giant rebellious asshole, and I also like tend to fall in line in those situations where I'm like, okay, fine, I'll hyperextend everything just so you don't yell at me because it's unpleasant. And so I think I must be like the bane of the existence of like all dogmatic yoga teachers ever, like everywhere, because every time a client works on me, so much of the work that we do is me going, okay, so here are your tendencies. You want to take yoga. That's awesome. Keep taking yoga. But I want you to break all of these rules subtly if you can. And they're like, but the person behind me will judge me. And I go, well, think of it this way. If the person behind you is judging you, there's another person behind them who's watching you, who's so grateful that you've given them permission to break the same rules because it's going to feel better in their body.
Yeah, we explore these dynamics a lot in embodied yoga principles, one of the things I lead. Because what we found is there's so many little social dynamics that go on in a yoga class, like pride and shame, and people, oh, thank God you've given me permission to do that, or I'm rebelling, and I'm rebelling because I'm an asshole, or I'm rebelling because I actually need to, or I'm practicing, going along with things, and that's actually really good for me, or actually that's the last thing I need to do. So there's all these social dynamics around power and relationships happening in a class, and occasionally it's obvious, like the teacher running across the room and screaming at you, hitting you with a stick and taking a water bottle or something. But the majority of the time, it's this kind of like under the surface psychology that's happening. And I suspect if I wasn't a psychologist that had quite a strong noticing for those things, I wouldn't, it would be just playing out fairly unconsciously. So one of the things I'm fond of is bringing some of those things to the surface and pointing out to teachers that I work with, you do get that even if you're not the mean Bikram teacher, you're still applying just by the fact that you're a yoga teacher and you're in front of the room and the room's set up in a certain way and they have history around teachers and authority figures, you're going to be obeyed. And it's like that's not obvious to many teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not just yoga. I think it happens anywhere in
martial arts,
fitness and yoga space. Yeah. And also, I mean, even in the somatic space. And the funny thing is, it gets like extra weird, I think, in the somatic space. Okay. Like I have a friend who teaches meditation, and we had a whole conversation last night about how she has to go to her body worker today because her knee hurts from sitting in easy pose, like cross-legged, for like 90 minutes a day for 30 days or something. And so I was like, your meditation practice is hardcore when sitting still causes a knee injury.
Yeah. Yeah. And pretty much all long-term meditation practice causes a knee injury. So no, it does. I mean, no one admits this, but proper meditators, I'm not talking about, 10 minutes of mindfulness with your app sitting on the train commuting, but the old school meditators, doing an hour a day, 2 hours a day, transcendental meditation, or monks I've spent a lot of time around, they nearly all have bad knees because you're just not meant to sit still for that long. And often, if someone has a posture which is slightly off, like lifting heavy weights, sitting for many, many, many hours is going to do that knee in. So it's many of the positions, such as the lotus position or half lotus, if you don't have flexible enough hips because you grew up with furniture and not squatting, well, yeah, that's going to hurt you.
Right. So just imagine how many people would be happier meditating if we gave them permission to straighten their leg.
Sure. Yeah, you can meditate in chairs and standing and all kinds of other, all kinds of other positions. Do you know what I mean? It's not necessary, but I think the traditionalists like to sit in certain ways, which I imagine with sort of Asian bodies from slightly malnourished monks, kind of is quite different from the average British or American person with in a kind of furniture-based lifestyle.
Probably.
You think we could guess that one? Let's talk about hypermobility. So, like, often people think, you've got to do yoga because we're all sort of stiff and, we're not very flexible. And people will say to me, I can't do Pilates or yoga or martial arts or whatever because I'm not flexible enough, which I always found funny as a reason not to do it. But then actually there's this other end of the spectrum, right? Which is people, and it's fairly common, who are more mobile than is necessarily safe. How would you define hypermobility?
I mean, this is going to be a very non-clinical, non-technical definition, but essentially it's whether it's because of something you've done in training or a natural tendency, you have a lot of laxity around the joint. And so where you should have ligament and muscle support when you fully extend the joint, you go beyond whatever that joint can really handle. So it's like if you straighten your arm all the way, like your elbow doesn't just line up. So your wrist, your elbow, and your shoulder are going to be in the same line. Your elbow is going to kind of pop out at this kind of funky angle. And you have less muscular support there. So you're just more likely to hang out in a ligament, which isn't going to feel great over time if you add a bunch of, impact to it or a lot of load.
That particular one you mentioned, I used to teach archery, so I used to there was quite a severe consequence to having that happen. Your elbow got hit by the string, the inside of the elbow, and I'd noticed a very strong gender difference in that one. So, if these systems have been invented by men and the majority of women have an elbow that extends past 100, the average man is like 170 to 180, the average woman is not only extending back more, you probably know this, but also slightly out to the side. And, that is just a different shape though, right? I mean, that's not necessarily a problem. That's just a different setup than the system may have been designed for.
Exactly. And so that's the thing is, like, all of this stuff, it's not a crisis. It's not, your elbow's horrible and you need to be super worried about your elbow. But it is something to go, maybe my setup should be different, or maybe I need different cues, or I mean, the real issue, I think, sometimes is those of us who have natural tendencies to hyperflex tend to, as human beings, we like to do things that we're good at. So people who have a lot of mobility and flexibility, like me, like I liked gymnastics and backbending and cheerleading because I was really good at bending backwards. And then I liked, Pilates because I could go backwards. And then I liked yoga because you could go backwards. And then I spent all of this time basically going backwards at end range of motion where I wasn't strong. And now, science sort of is finding that when you hang out at end ranges of motion where you don't have strength, that's why injuries happen. And so I ended up with a lot of pain.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, backbending to a large degree is just purely genetic. The amount people could do, the thickness of the discs in people's back. This is what one of my yoga teachers who is anatomically informed tells me, so sort of constantly trying to work on that for someone that isn't naturally that way inclined. And then, as you say, we have tendencies and then do those things more, and they're rewarded too, right? Like in kind of, I keep picking on yoga, but it's just because it's a common example. Like in the yoga scene, if you are a super bendy, flexible person, that's rewarded. That's considered, good or advanced. I hear people say, "Oh, she's doing an advanced pose," and it's like, well, no, she's just 17 and super bendy girl, and that's just what she can do. That's not advanced. That's just the shape of her body right now.
Right. And I mean, that's always been funny to me too, because like I can flop into a split, I can flop into a back bend, like I can make all sorts of weird shapes, but like, I need a hole in my head because I'm just mostly hyperextending at like 2 points of my lumbar spine. But B, that doesn't actually, for me, that doesn't take any strength or skill. I didn't really have to work to do that. I've always been able to make big, giant, crazy shapes. For me, the real effort has been figuring out like how to lie on my side and like lift my leg while holding my leg in its socket. Like that is exceedingly hard for me. So it's also just relative. Like if you're really good at doing it, maybe you should go practice the thing you're not so good at, so you're a more well-rounded mover and you're not just getting likes on Instagram.
Yeah, I remember once I was working on a sort of yoga stretch for about 6 months. I was wanting to get a bit more flexibility, and I'd gone like a couple of inches more than I had before, and I was like, this is, it's really come along, And my wife was just watching me, and she never does yoga. But she's a different age, different body shape. And she said, oh, let me have a go at that. And she did it and just immediately did it twice as kind of flexible as I had, the particular hip opening stretch that I was been working on. And I was just like, you bitch. And it's like, she hadn't worked on it at all. And I'd been doing it every day for 6 months just because we're different, we're set up different. And it's just, and for her, it's much more about like the strength and, like I have a kind of natural upper body strength, which is just not ever going to have, in her build in the same way as I won't have her flexibility. And so it's yeah. So I think that's part of it there. So in terms of like relationship to pain, like what is it like? Are you from the sort of model of if it hurts, don't do it? Do you see people push through a lot of pain? You see people even see pain as, no pain, no gain, right? That's the gym thing, kind of military ethos that's in gyms around the world. What do you see as people's relationship to pain and what do you advise?
Yeah, I mean, So first off, like pain, talk about a big complicated topic, but I tend to see people fall on, I think our biggest issue is we don't understand pain. Most of us don't understand pain in our own bodies and experience well enough to understand how to take the appropriate signal or action from it. So most of the people I work with, and I have a bit of this too, depending on where they're at in their history and their experience, fall on one of two sides of the spectrum. So and again, I'm going to pick on the gym people because I love them, but I'm one of them, and we're kind of dumb sometimes about this. They fall on the side of like, no pain, no gain. So they're like, rawr, I'm going to thrash it, screw it, it hurts, I'm just going to keep pushing. And so they tend to do like, yeah, man, those push-ups make my wrist feel like crap, but I need to get better at push-ups, so I'm just going to do more push-ups. And then their wrist really feels like crap because there's something going on, right, in their shoulder girdle or in their wrist, like that's not the right setup, or they need to do some more prep work. And then that results in a repetitive stress injury. So like that pain, like the pain in the joint pain shouldn't ever be happening. So that's like not good pain, right? Like burning in a muscle, like as you crank out your last couple reps, like cool, totally fine. A little bit of soreness because you've done something novel 24 to 48 hours afterwards, totally fine, especially because if you do that again later that week, you probably won't be sore again, right? That's just natural adaptation. That's normal. Yeah. So that's kind of where the gym, quote unquote, the gym mentality or the sort of the overachiever mentality could benefit from, is going, okay, so this hurts, but does this hurt because it's like physically uncomfortable hard in a muscle, or I'm breathing hard, versus like, does this feel like I'm cranking in a joint? So that's my litmus test for that group. On the flip side, right, you have more of the people who are kind of fearful of movement, and they're fearful of, exercise. Like, how do people define what they do it varies, but they're fearful of doing an activity because they've had a lot of pain. And for those people, they're often deconditioned and weak. And so because they've been benched for a while, because they've had this pain. And so for them, the conversation often has to be, well, did it hurt in the joint, or was it just physically uncomfortable? So those people need more tolerance. So they kind of need just like a little baby nudge to try something that might be a little uncomfortable, whereas the gym people need a little bit more of like, whoa, let's back this up a second and see what's happening here.
Yeah, one of my teachers, Peter Blackaby, he's kind of one of the better-known yoga teachers in the UK and very anatomically trained. He's always saying, look, don't stop using it just because you're injured. And he says a lot of the kind of problems that come after an injury are from non-usage and people kind of backing off from things too much, being too cautious. And I also think just most people don't have many distinctions around pain. I'm a bit of a pain wine taster. I feel like only potentially like S&M people have more distinctions than martial artists and maybe ballet dancers. And it's like, the difference between a sharp pain and a good pain and a bad pain. And, like I've been in Aikido, I've done Aikido for 20 years. You do have a lot of wrist locks and arm locks. So sort of pain just becomes just normal, and you learn not to react to that. And you learn to go, okay, that's damaging and sharp and sudden. And that's just a sort of sweet wake up pain, which is actually quite enjoyable. And, I've got some people coming on from the kink scene, actually, because I feel like they're all experts in consent and also in pain. And I'm really fascinated because it's not really my thing, personally, but I'm fascinated to talk to them because, it feels like there's a lot to be learned in terms of relationship to pain and different types of pain.
Right. And everyone's tolerance is different. And I mean, I think to speak to what you're saying about like, well, if it hurts, don't do it. So if it hurts in that moment, probably stop, right?
Yeah.
Because it hurts. But then the answer isn't don't do it. The answer is figure out why it hurts. And then preferably if it's like, oh, this hurts a joint, address it by seeing the appropriate medical and then if needed, post-rehab, whatever, expert professional, so you can go back and still do the activity if you want to be doing it without it hurting. So I think that that's the incomplete piece of it is if it hurts, like don't keep doing it in that moment, but then ask yourself, why does it hurt?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Just change the track now. So you've interviewed a lot of people for your podcast as well, right?
Yes, we have. We've got like 50 something episodes now.
That's great. And like I also had Brooke on who does Liberated Body podcast, and I like interviewing other podcasters, A, because they're sort of together with the practicalities, but B, it's just not only that you've have your own experience, which is huge, but you've talked to all these other movement professionals.
Absolutely.
So what the theme of the podcast, first of all, so feel free to plug the podcast first of all.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. So the podcast is just called Moving Well. And essentially the reason why we started it is because I wanted to have conversations with other people in the movement and health and somatic world about their approaches, because I think that each of these individual disciplines has something brilliant to offer. Yeah. But so many of us are in a pissing match of like, it's basically, I'm going to be inappropriate here, like my dick is better than your dick, like, or bigger than your dick, like my information is better than your information.
Not true in this case, Nikki. I don't like to cast aspersions, and this is 2017, dangerous ground. But I'm going to say in this case, but I understand the metaphor. So normally people are pretty provincial and they're pretty protective of their kind of personal space. They're like, this is what I do. This is the best thing.
Right. But we each kind of have this zone of genius where we understand something really well. And so like in Pilates land, for example, we're pretty good at stability and we understand a lot about like joint mobility. Like those are things we're real good at. But we don't understand, unless we like power lift, we don't understand load. So we see things, for example, that power lifters are doing with like giant bars over their head. And we're like, oh, that's not a neutral shoulder. But the reason why their arms are over their head like that is that's a bony lock. So that's actually the safest, strongest place for them to push the giant weight. So we don't understand that load concept as well, right? Yeah. So if we talk to them and they explain to us those things, we could learn a lot that could help our clients on both ends. Because we could be like, great, here's some things you can do for like walking through your daily life. And then here are where the rules are different for this activity that you're interested in.
Yeah. And I've I remember one time seeing powerlifter, they do this weird thing sometimes when they bench press where they arch their back. Have you seen it? And it looks mental from any kind of possible point of view. But then it's just, what is it called? Do you know what it's called? It's like when so people can Google it at home. You can see YouTube videos of people and they basically.
I think if you just search like powerlifting bench press, right? But basically people have what looks like a hideous arch in their back. Yeah. And it's like a worse nightmare for like an alignment nerd who's like neutral all the time. They're like, that's not neutral.
Oh, it's so far from neutral. And I first time I looked at it, I went, that's insane. And then like a powerlifting friend of mine kind of explained it, and it was actually quite intelligently designed for their particular purpose. So I was kind of like, okay. And, I'm a big believer in cross training, and I always send my students off to do something different from what they've already done because it develops another side of their character as the sort of first thing, looking at it from an embodiment point of view. But as you also say, you can learn things in terms of teaching, right? Like there's a certain footstep that in Aikido we never do. And there's sort of reasons for it, but you just wouldn't think to do this particular foot move. And I was in Tango, and basically we do a lot of turning in Aikido, and you also do a lot of turning in Tango. And I saw this foot movement. I just went, why have we never done that in Aikido? It's just not on our radar. it's sort of an unimaginable possibility. And I did it in Aikido the next week, and people were just like, what the hell was that? It's a sort of strange dance move, but it does actually have a martial arts functionality. I kind of worked out there was a particular situation when it was optimal, but it just wouldn't occur to you in that context. And I feel like we're all slightly brainwashed and conditioned by the art we're in, and sometimes stepping out of that's pretty helpful.
Right. And again, to speak to sort of way back earlier in our conversation, going outside of your discipline, I mean, it is uncomfortable because most of the time, I mean, I hate the word paradigm because it's so overused, but most of the time you're stepping into a paradigm that you don't normally embody or live in. And so you're basically going to have, if you're someone who likes to be right all the time, which who doesn't like to be right all the time? You're going to definitely have cognitive dissonance because you're going to be like, why is this happening? Like, why are you doing this like this? This feels weird. This isn't how my body normally moves. Like, it's really uncomfortable. And then you have to untangle, like, how much of this is like my personal feelings towards the fact that I'm uncomfortable. Yeah. And then how much of this is actually me going, actually, I don't agree with you. Like, that's great that you believe that, but like, that's just like not for me. That's not for my clients. That doesn't make sense to me. So you know what? That's not how I'm going to do it. Versus again, just like how much of it is just my ego's hurt because you're doing things in a way that I was previously told not to do. And actually maybe there's some validity here to it.
Yeah, nice. And for me, it's like, yep, you're learning technique. Yeah, you're being challenged in your own, but there's also, it's like a different culture in each case. The first time I was at a Brazilian jiu-jitsu dojo, and people were kind of like leaning on the walls and hanging out, and they're like, flirting, or maybe, the first time, the place with like music playing, which is just not done in most Japanese martial arts, and going just stepping outside the normal cultural, and I mean like subcultural constraints. There's a certain tradition that Pilates has. There's a certain tradition that Tango has. And I feel like there's something very helpful in, you can learn teaching styles differently. We can just things that are outside of our world, I think, are very helpful in that way.
Absolutely. And I mean, the culture part's so interesting to me too, because like, for example, like shockingly, I don't do well in yoga culture. Mm-hmm. Can't imagine why.
You surprised me. You surprised me there.
Right? Because I'm not I'm quite irreverent. Like I'm kind of a shit disturber. And so if you put me in a room and you tell me that I'm supposed to be quiet and zen and be reverent towards your wind chimes, and you're the blonde Lululemon girl, like, and that's fine. I'm a blonde Lululemon girl, but I just have a hard time taking it seriously because the critical thinking part of my brain and the sarcasm part of my brain is just going bananas. So I probably could benefit from doing some yoga, but like the general green juice vegan yoga culture, I have a hard time with, not because I think green juice is bad or vegans are evil. Like, I actually like vegan food, but because I just have a hard time with that dogma.
Food. Nobody likes vegan food. Come on, be honest.
If it's done well, I've got some friends who are really.
If it's done well,
their stuff's pretty good. But and I live in Seattle, so they'll tar and feather me, free range chicken feathers. But
yeah, okay, you can. I like that, but still, that's tarred and feathered with free range chicken feathers. Okay, cool. Yeah, so
right. So I have to sometimes like it.
You have to. I tolerate it.
You have to. They'll kick you out otherwise.
Much better at pretending it tastes good. Okay, so so we learn to lie to our fascist friends. Okay, so on the your own podcast, you've had loads of good people on. I'm literally like scrolling through the list now. Is on there. It's quite a long list. There's some people that are well known on there. Trina, who we haven't showed, George Mitchell. Like, is there anyone, like, tell me a few people that like really stood out from the podcast of having some really unusual perspectives on the body, and particularly the sort of psychological side of things.
As far as the psychological kind of things go, we had a really interesting conversation with James Crater about what it is to use your core.
Okay.
Because especially in fitness and Pilates, like, everyone is like obsessed with the core muscles, and like
Isn't
some
that
people
a bullshit
like
word? Whenever I hear, I'm just going to jump in, sorry, because whenever I hear core, it just sounds like a load of bullshit to me. Does it actually mean anything?
No, that was the whole point of the podcast. Was we were like, yep, we're Pilates teachers, and sometimes we even like sell core, like, and we show core workouts. But we're like, core is like, the concept of core is kind of dumb, because basically it's just like, do you have lumbopelvic stability, or can you control where your spine is in space? Like your core is going to fire no matter what. Like you don't need to think, dear psoas, please turn on. So I thought that was kind of a good one, because we were like, all right, how do we look at this from like appreciating that like there's anatomy and there's this inherent core timing that like hopefully as a movement professional, you can watch someone move and be like, whoop, that timing's good. They can do hard stuff, or whoop, that timing's not so good. Let's back it up until they learn how to like control these segments better. But like not being so bogged down in the idea of like, I need to engage my core to protect my back, which is like the reason why everyone finds us.
Yeah. So sometimes I found, I'm going to be blunt, Pilates people to be a little bit uptight, controlling. And we're control freaks. Yeah, and I wonder if does that come before the practice, or is that as a result of sort of, being this kind of tight core thing sucked up? I mean, Ashtanga yogis have the same thing, right? Kind of like constantly using that bandha. So, I wonder which comes first.
I mean, I'm sure it depends, but I have to say, being someone who is immediately drawn to Pilates, for example, and immediately turned off by yoga, even though I did have my hot yoga phase, which was an interesting repetitive stress injury. But anyway, I think it's the uptight thing. I think if you're kind of a control freak, like for me, I ended up in Pilates because like, first I was like, all right, I'm going to control things by like pound. I'm going to do all this high intensity stuff. And then I was like, oh, that hurts. And now like everything feels out of control. Right. So then I was like, oh, this Pilates thing is great. Like you control everything all the time. It's amazing. And so I took like all of that obsessive nature and then stuck it in like hyper controlling things, and then caused a new set of problems. But yeah, we like control. We want the nuance of your pinky toe moves exactly like this, damn it.
Yeah. There's something in that which is both beautiful and terrifying to me. And then there's in embodiment, there's the other end of the spectrum. There's the freedom freaks. And my friend who does a kind of 5 rhythms type dance thing was telling me the other day, she was just outraged that the teacher was suggesting she take a partner and dance the other day. And it didn't sound like the teacher was being fascist about it. It didn't seem like she was forcing her. She was just kind of strongly suggesting, look, this is what we're doing today. And she would say, the mark of a good teacher is they don't say anything. They just let us dance, And I was like, wow, that's the other end of the spectrum, like no one tells me what to do. I will never control my body. It's like, what, you're just going to fucking wet your pants when you need the toilet? That's the ultimate in body freedom, is being a fucking 1-year-old, right? Like they just shit themselves whenever they need to shit, like that's the ultimate in not controlling yourself. If you want to, is that freedom? It's sort of like West Coast, East Coast, isn't it? Like that West Coast version of freedom. But maybe in Seattle it's a bit different. I haven't been up there. I've only been to California out there, so maybe it's different. Up the coast where
we're just a bit more. We're a specific brand of that West Coast, let's just say. And I'm from the East Coast, so that's sort of funny to me too. But yeah, you can basically overdo anything, is what this shows us, right? Like you can overdo control, and there are some people where it's like, actually, you could benefit from a Zumba class where you flail around and like, don't worry about your knee, like as long as there's nothing's compromised, right? And then on the flip side, there's people where it's like, whoa, like maybe we could rein it in just a little bit so your life has enough structure that you can exist as an adult on Earth. Yeah.
The whole of being an adult, grown up thing might be helpful. I know for me, it certainly was to get that sort of structure and disciplining my system. There was a time when that was like definitely the thing I needed. And then times when it wasn't, and being able to move between those was helpful. Okay, anyone else? Who's good? I'm not going to ask you like, who is your favorite guest? And
right.
I'm not going to ask you that. And if anyone asks me that, I'm not going to say Nikki. But anyone else who kind of really stands out? It's like, wow, I saw this one here on play, for example, like using play to enhance fitness. I mean, you've had Instagram, got some strength, bigness, getting jacked. Like, there's been all sorts on there. I mean, is any of those that stand out?
I think it just depends on what your interest is. So, if, like, for example, like I'll just throw out a few ideas for people. So, like, if you happen to be a contemporary Pilates teacher who thinks that all of the traditional stuff is like, you're like, why would someone do that? That's not functional. It doesn't make sense. And you balk at that stuff. Like, I would say go listen to Benjamin Dagenhart, because he's got a pretty lovely understanding of how contemporary movement works and modern science. And he's a traditional teacher and he blends it beautifully. And I thought he did a really great job explaining it. And if you're someone who, like you don't understand aesthetic goals, or you're not super interested in lifting, or maybe you are, but like you're afraid of it, but your clients are interested in lifting, I would say like go listen to Courtney Thomas on this idea of getting jacked, because like she's like this little tiny chick with giant ass muscles and she's kind of a badass, and it's sort of fun to listen to her talk about it and go like, okay, maybe I don't want like giant muscles, but like some of my clients might, and maybe it's kind of fun to understand Courtney, this mentality that's outside of
She just said you had a giant ass. She just said you had, Courtney, if you're listening, you just said you had giant ass muscles. That's what I heard there. So I just say I'm distancing.
Well, her tagline is her tagline is big arms, big life. So we can say she's got giant biceps. How about that?
She'll be into it. She'll be into it. Okay. It's funny, like weightlifting is really, we talked about weightlifting a couple times in the gym. It's like people from the alternative background, which is most of the people who listen to this, as I understand it. We have less gym people listening. In fact, most people here listening may be fairly negative about the gym, about weightlifting and about the gym and that kind of mainstream fitness culture. And, I get why, the consumer vibe there and the body materialism, treating the body as an object. But what do you think like the more alternative world of yoga and dance and martial arts can learn from the fitness industry? As you're sort of as near as we get to a fitness trainer on the show. So on behalf of your people, like what can the kind of alternative world learn from that world?
Well, I mean, first off, I'll say that like if you're kind of turned off by that world, like group hug me too. Because like I have a hard time existing in the gym world and the somatic world, because I kind of like both, and I kind of have an issue with both depending on what the subject is. But like I didn't start lifting heavy until like maybe a year ago, and the reason why I started lifting heavy is I was in this bodywork training and everything was you meditated for 15 minutes every morning, and then you'd sit there and you'd push off the ground and the foot had to be just so, and you needed a pillow fort for everything you did, and everything was very reverent. And then on top of it, I'm hypermobile and we got shit tons of massage. And so like I had all of this pain that I'd never had before in my life. Like I normally don't have SI joint pain, and I'd have like terrible SI joint pain because I was like so overmobilized by soft tissue work. And I figured out that if I got up at 6 a.m. every morning and I went and I lifted really heavy objects, two things. First off, I felt like, yes, I'm sticking it to my teacher. I'm doing all the things that you said I shouldn't do. And I'm pretty sure my shoulder girdle's not neutral, so suck it. And then on top of that, because I'd put all these like movement patterns into my body from heavy lifting, it bolstered my system up enough that when someone massaged me, they were just undoing whatever crazy shit I'd done that morning instead of like hypermobilizing all of my tissues, and I stopped having pain in these trainings. And then I kind of started to love it. But beyond that, the reason why I'd avoided it up until that point was I was like, I'm not a bro. I don't want to grunt. I don't like this hyper aggressive culture. And what I found was when I went and I lifted on my own time, and I kind of just slowly eased into it, starting first with things that I was a little more comfortable with, and then kind of going outside of my comfort zone with equipment that I wasn't so strong in. So I started with like dumbbells because I understood those, and eventually moved over to more barbells. Was you can if you can take an embodied approach. So the things that you know about alignment and breathing and centering yourself and grounding yourself and like really being in that zone, and you can take that feeling and then apply it to doing a really strong lift against resistance. You feel awesome. Like physically, you actually feel better because you're putting new stimulus in your body that it probably could benefit from, and you are able to actually do more. But B, it's actually really fun because you start to go, oh, these are two sides of the same coin. So they're not fighting each other. A lot of these rules still apply. And actually, in some ways you're better at the lifting thing than maybe some of the people who just start lifting without that knowledge are, because you know how to use breath pattern, you know how to do control, you have proprioception, you are embodied, so you can feel how to adjust things. So I don't know. I mean, that's what I have to say to that is like there's actual physical benefits to doing general traditional fitness things, but also it's really fun if you can apply your somatic work to it.
Yeah, strength training I think is underrated. I know for old people it's kind of like one of the sort of best things for health. For me, there's also just a lot of joy in it. If you're a fairly yang person that likes to fully express themselves, like there's nothing like, lifting a heavy weight. And it can be combined with all the embodied stuff, like you can, like I did a series of videos on YouTube about embodied fitness years ago, and you can totally combine it. There's absolutely no reason why you can't be working on your intention and relaxation and kind of somatic stuff. I feel like the biggest barrier is sometimes the culture that's around the gym. It's not necessarily the weightlifting or the practice itself. And there's something about that intensity of strong weights, for example, that demands like full effort and full surrender. It really puts you into some strong yin and yang kind of polarities, which are super interesting from an embodiment point of view to explore.
Right. And the other thing I'll say is, the culture is important. So where you work out matters. So in my case, like I found someone to give me feedback on my form, who comes from a space of right now, there's a lot of, especially if you're a woman who's listening, there's a lot of like raw girl power going on where they're really trying to encourage people from a thoughtful place to like really feel strong and show up and sort of do things from a place that feels good for them. So if you can find one of those spaces, like that's cool. Or if you're like me, you live in an area that's a little less boutique-y, like I love working out at our local Y because like there's like a one-armed Samoan dude there like pushing a tire around, and there's some old people. Like the whole thing is really weird. It's amazing. Like no one gives two shits. No one's looking at you. So also I think finding the right place to work out in. But like when I work out at like my parents' gym in like McLean, Virginia, where everyone drives like a $100,000 car, and the average age in that gym is like 50 with, their really young wife, stereotyping, but I've seen it. And they all stare you down for being the only chick that's powerlifting. It's weird.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. I go to the gayest gym I can just so I have loads of guys helping me with my form. Do you know what I mean? Loads of like really helpful Dutch guys who like want to help me want to show me up close how to do things, and I can get some free tuition. So that's hilarious. But so no, the gym you pick does matter, and avoid Globo Gym. I'm thinking, what's that comedy of gyms? I like that one. It's a good one. Okay, so gyms. Dodgeball. That's good. It's exactly like life. And I recommend a book called Strength to Awaken by Rob McNamara for anyone who wants he's like a Zen priest who lifts weights. And you go to his house, there's like a little Zen shrine, there's just protein shakes all around it. And Rob is like, that's by far the deepest book on weightlifting I've ever read. It's like a super deep Zen book. And if you want to go like deep into how deep kind of like fitness and weights kind of can be, that would be the place I'd recommend people to. Cool. Well, we're almost on time.
That's awesome.
Nikki, this has been fun. Like, I feel like we shouldn't, like, you're another one of the guests I've had that I shouldn't be allowed to like socialize with unsupervised. I think we can get into trouble, and we just upset yoga teachers and stuff like that. Anything else you really want to talk about before we head off?
No, nothing too specific. I'll just say if anyone wants to check out the podcast, it's just search Moving Well Podcast, and our website will pop up, will also pop up on iTunes and Stitcher and all that fun stuff. If you want to find me, it's my last name, .com basically, which is a nightmare to spell, but it's Naab-Levy, Naab-Levy.com, and that's got, social media and all that other fun stuff that's on there.
Great. So naab-levy.com, and I'll link also to that, and also movingwellpodcast.com, which I literally just put my phone out and got on, just downloaded myself in a couple of episodes to listen to on the train to London tonight. So I recommend that to people. And last, Nikki, closing message about the body. Anything you want to say?
Pretty much that if you are given advice about your body, that you just think that's not going to work for me, but like it really doesn't resonate. Like the way that it comes at you is like your spidey sense is like, this really isn't the way I want to go about this. Like honor your spidey sense. Like it's okay. It's okay to use your intuition. You don't need a guru to tell you what's best for you. And it might mean that you learn something the hard way, but we're all more resilient than we think we are. So guess what? Even if you learn it the hard way, you'll be okay.
Nikki, thank you. I'm going to call this episode Rebel Fitness. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.